The carriage took us to an entrance of an inn. The host rushed forward to receive the carriage reins, bowing and dry-washing his hands with delight. "Ah, Sir Francis! Welcome. We are not expecting you until tomorrow." "The road to here was better than I feared." My father smiled through his gray bristles as they bushed like a haystack under his chin, as he leaned out of the carriage window. "We made good time." My father stepped down swiftly on the carriage pedestal, and I slipped on my hat and trailed behind him, my cloak swaying as I stepped down. My boots hit muddy cobbles. The servant smiled. "Who is this, sir?" "It is my son, Henry Hal Hartstone. I thought I'd take him in and let him observe my work today." My father smiled down on the servant, whose skin was as dark as the night sky. The servant swiped his sweaty bald head with a damp cloth, smiled up at with loose lips. "How do you do, sir?" he asked me. "I'm quite fine, thank you, sir," I said. "That is wonderful to hear. I am sure you are most delighted to see the business that takes place here." I merely smiled at the slave. He hurried off with the horse as the coachman followed them to the stables around back. We entered the inn and slapped down on one of the parlor chairs. The room smelled of rum, pipe smoke, meat, and sweat. Not to my taste at all, and I had to hold my nostrils to keep me from smelling. My father set his leather hat on the tabletop. "Give us a pitcher of small beer to wash the dust from our throats." My father stamped his boot heel to indicate the urgency. A barman brought us a giant redwood pitcher in which my father poured the ale into our mugs. I hated the taste of an English oak beer, too bitter as it traveled down my gullet like seawater. My father coughed through his mug and drops of beer hung in his beard. "Watch and learn, laddie, to see how the business of things is conducted. These men who own this parlor are staff to the Honorable East India Company, and they take their instruction very seriously." I nodded as I watched my father go to work. The servant that had taken the reins returned inside. "I have the usual private chamber ready for you, Sir Francis, and room for your son with you." He smiled. "Good. Send grooms to take care of the horses." "I have a message from Lord Beckett for you, Sir Francis. He charged me most strictly to send him word the minute you arrived." The servant bowed. "Have you done so?" My father rounded on him sharply, and I watched the servant get a little nervous as he flicked his round black pupils at me and then my father. From what my father had told me, Lord Ryder Beckett was the chairman of the English East India Company, but he ran it like he was a king of his own fief. He was a man of vast wealth and influence in the royal court. The crown was a major shareholder in the company, and thus Beckett had the ear and favor of the sovereign himself. Not a man to treat lightly, I thought to myself. I'd wager he's a scoundrel that only cares for his gold. I have already this minute sent a message to him," the servant said. My father quaffed from the pitcher of beer behind his hand, and I took another sip, just trying to act like I knew what was going on mostly. "You can show us up now." We got up and followed the host to the stairs, backing ahead of him and bowing at every third step, which to me was a bit silly watching a man bow down to my father, but after all, his exploits are famous. Annoyed, my father swiftly approved them, and we stepped into the room. My father's private chamber had its own salon, bar, and dining room. "Fancy, father," I smirked. He merely grinned. "Sometimes I just have to splurge a little." We sat at the dining table that was carved with designs of dolphins on the wooden sides and sat next to each other. My mind flowed to the woman I met in the market over an hour ago and decided to bring up a different tack. She was so beautiful. It made my heart flick with love. The servants brought us fluffy yellow tea cakes littered with powdered sugar and dotted with blood-red raspberries. I dug into it with a beautiful fork made of silver and tasted the sweet aroma of dough and sugar and tart of the berries, which made me quiver with delight. Then they brought us hot steaming cups of English black tea with sugar cubes to wash down, and the taste of the bitter tea was soothing. "Father, might I inquire a favor?" I asked him. "What is this favor?" "The woman I met in the market earlier." My father raised an eyebrow. "Aye, lad. What about her?" I fiddled with my fingers between my palms nervously. Well, Father, you see, she is gorgeous and all, and I respectably understand if your liking to her is ill-advised. Just since we met in the market, but I felt my heart pluck for her. She invited me to stroll in the company gardens near Brookshire after your meeting. Might I attend? My father narrowed his eyes at me, rather trying to figure out what my true intentions were, which were of getting to know her and spend time with her, rather than I just want to fuck her. After 20 seconds of intense sweating sessions, he nodded. Very well. You may go, but only for an hour, for the coach picks us up at docks at 6 o'clock. It is a 3-hour carriage ride back home. Do not be late. Thank you, Father. A messenger from Ryder Beckett arrived before 2 slaves had brought my father's bundles of maps and muddles that we had bought at the market, and from Mr. Witts that were strapped to the roof of the carriage. The livered footman bowed and handed my father the sealed sheet of parchment. He gave him a gold coin from his pocket and split the wax seal with his thumb. The letter was penned by his secretary. What does it say? I asked, leaning over his shoulder to examine the pretty black writing. Lord Beckett requests the pleasure of your company to a supper an hour henceforth, at 3 o'clock at the Bombay House. Below this was a note in Beckett's own hand that I even recognized from his pamphlets on the town newsletter in the London Gazette. Oswald Hyde will be the only other guest. R.B. My father whistled softly. Indeed, jolly good. What is it? I asked. A private supper with 2 of the highest-ranking men in the company. Something interesting afoot. Come, Henry. Let's get you into something more, let's say, suitable. And I felt the excitement tingle in my veins. But first, lad, a lesson. A lesson? I don't need any teachings, Father. You've done that enough today. But yes, you do, lad. I've scheduled you to practice your fencing with Master Canterbooks in thus 10 minutes out in the courtyard below our parlor. I was not made aware of such matters. All the better to be surprised. My father giggled. That is a price of trade with the old man, to see 'tis a woman in the garden. A fair bargain.